Spanning the history of Temple Shaaray Tefila as we celebrate our 155th anniversary, looking back over the years and honoring our rabbis. The year was 1845. In New York City, a group of dissidents from Congregation B'nai Jeshurun broke away and founded Shaaray Tefila, the first Ashkenazic congregation in the United States. Reverend Samuel Isaacs was elected Hazan, or spiritual leader. He was an English Jew, familiar with Jewish folklore, although no rabbinical ordination. Shaaray Tefila was an Orthodox congregation. Reverend Isaacs was opposed to the newly forming Reform movement. He was the editor of the Jewish Messenger and quite influential among Jews of New York. At the death of President Lincoln, Reverend Isaacs was the only Jew in New York who was invited to officiate in the memorial service. The new congregation's first services were held over a stable on Franklin Street, and later a permanent sanctuary was built at 110 Wooster. By 1862, the Jewish community was moving uptown, and since they were Orthodox, they wouldn't travel on the Sabbath. An uptown synagogue seemed like a good idea. Land was purchased at West 44th and 6th, with the new synagogue opening its doors in 1869. At this time, a ritual committee was formed and some minor changes instituted. In 1873, it was agreed to hire an assistant, Reverend Dr. Frederick de Sola Mendez. He became chief rabbi in 1877. Reverend de Sola Mendez was born in Montego Bay, Jamaica, into a family that traced 10 generations of rabbis. He was educated in London and Europe and presided over the congregation for 43 years. His style was very different from Reverend Isaacs and was more inclined to consider the needs and ideas of the younger generation. He continued to reform the service and recommended a change to the Reform movement to the board in 1880. Shaaray Tefila was again moving northward with its congregants. A new wave of immigration had begun teeming into New York. In 1884, the temple moved to West 82nd and Columbus Avenue. In this new building, the West End Synagogue retained the Ark, eternal light, and much interior woodwork from the 44th Street building. Sweeping changes were made in 1885. Wearing of the tallit became a personal choice. Evening services changed to 8 p.m. and observation of the second-day holidays was minimized. The services shortened and more English spoken. Men and women were no longer separated. Jews had become active in many causes. The Jewish community had come of age. Reverend de Sola Mendez had his golden anniversary publicized in the New York Times. In 1915, the congregation decided on an assistant, Dr. Nathan Stern, and he became senior rabbi in 1920. Rabbi Stern is Shaaray Tefila's first rabbi to be entirely of American background. He was educated at Columbia University, Jewish Theological Seminary, and Hebrew Union College. In 1921, a strong wave of enthusiasm was generated in the temple after the 75th anniversary. The board was inspired to raise sufficient sum to pay off the mortgage. After 60 years, Shaaray Tefila was free of debt. Committees were active and flourishing. Life in New York was good. In just 80 years, the congregation had grown from a handful it started with. The membership grew from the original core of mutual acquaintanceship and relations to a membership that was bound by the organizations of philanthropic, educational, and social purposes. Life had also changed in New York. As well as Jewish theater, sons of immigrants helped inaugurate the rise of Broadway and helped shape American music. 1929. The Great Crash. The Depression created financial difficulty for the Jewish community. Within 2 years, instead of a full synagogue, 1/3 of the seats were unsold. The once great reserve fund was beginning to be depleted, and by 1934, nearly 1/2 of the seats were unsold. On March 27, 1937, the first day of Passover, fire broke out and destroyed the Ark, the pulpit, and the entire south wall of the building. Fortunately, the insurance covered the damage, and the decision was made not only to rebuild the synagogue, but to build a synagogue house. By 1943, there was a sharp increase in membership once again. Rabbi Stern retired, and Rabbi Bernard J. Bamberger became senior rabbi. Rabbi Bamberger was a graduate of Johns Hopkins and Hebrew Union College. Within a few years of becoming senior rabbi in 1944, he was also installed as president of the Synagogue Council of America. After the war, attention was drawn to growth. Rabbi Bamberger led a movement to relocate to the east side, believing membership could double from the existing 600 members. On October 5, 1958, an article appeared in the New York Times announcing the plan for the new temple in a shell of an old movie theater located at 79th and 2nd Avenue. By September 1959, the temple was dedicated, with Governor Rockefeller, Senator Javits, and Mayor Wagner in attendance. With the continued growth, a new community house was built on land adjacent to the temple. Rabbi Bamberger was especially proud of the 6 bronze bas-reliefs installed in the temple sanctuary in 1965. The rabbi was also very involved in the Union of Rabbis. He was a prolific writer. In 1969, Rabbi Bamberger celebrated his 25th anniversary as rabbi of Shaaray Tefila. But in 1970, he retired, and his former assistant, Rabbi Harvey M. Tattlebaum, became senior rabbi.
I know in the past years since I became the rabbi, not quite the senior rabbi because I was the only rabbi in 1971, the numbers of this wonderful institution were so small. It needed such upbuilding. There perhaps were not even 200 families in the congregation. It's hard to believe that we've gone through this kind of growth since 1971, that the school grew from about 60 or 70 children to a system of schools. There's so many lovely highlights. I'll go quickly over them. I remember when we burnt the mortgage. It was such a shot in the arm. I remember this silver bowl in which the mortgage was placed, and the match was lit, and suddenly we were fire worshipers. The whole assembly, young and old, started doing a hora around the silver bowl which held the mortgage. The nearly 20 trips that we've taken to Israel, the hundreds of people that we've brought to Israel, I can't possibly recount the sense of joy of the 75, 80 ceremonies of bar and bat mitzvah all over the land of Israel. For year after year, the study weekends, what we call the study retreats that we had, from one resort to another, one country club to another, plays that have been put on the stage of the Davis Auditorium through the years, dramatic and lighthearted. I'd love to go back into history and speak to those who have sat in the rabbinical chair of this temple before me. Samuel Isaacs. Some German Jews came with him. Many Scottish and English Jews came with him for this new congregation that had a new and different cultural feel. He was a champion of orthodoxy. De Sola Mendes, he felt that we had to move in a reformist mode so that we could draw and attract and keep the young people. Nathan Stern, who had been assistant and rabbi, I think almost for half a century, brought Temple Shaaray Tefillah very much into the classical reform camp. One of the great scholars of the reform movement, Dr. Bernard J. Bamberger, who was visionary and who could see the changes that were coming and who was somewhat amenable to the coming changes of what we might call the traditionalization of reform. How I would love to speak with them all. Oh, if I could only speak with these gentlemen.
I have had the opportunity to know my predecessor, Rabbi Harvey Tattlebaum. He bequeathed to me and to all of us a wonderful gift, a congregation that is visionary in its lay leadership, that is solid and firm in its programming, and wonderfully professional in its staff. He's been incredibly supportive of me as we've moved into the future, and all of us owe him a great debt of gratitude for building on the past that he inherited and making it even stronger and better. I came here just before September 11th, 2001. In the wake of that tragic moment in our nation's history and the history of our city, our congregation pulled together in an extraordinary way. In the past 4+ years, we have been blessed to continue to build on this solid foundation. We've experimented with new forms of worship. We've expanded the offerings to our early childhood population. We have created opportunities for families to come together in education and youth group programs. We've added to our staff. We have expanded the offerings in our adult education program and the opportunities to volunteer through our social action programs as well. those who came before us built a synagogue worthy of the allegiance of so many members of the Jewish community. As we look to the future, we have many challenges yet to face. Prime among them, perhaps, the expansion of our facility. While what happens inside this building is often extraordinary, we are literally bursting at the seams. But even if we're able to build the finest, greatest, shiniest new building in the world, that in and of itself is not enough, of course. In the Torah we read, Asuli mikdash v'shachanti betocham, build me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst. The purpose of a new building will be to continue to build on the legacy of the past, to be a place of education, a house of worship, and a synagogue that offers service to its members and to the community. 160 years of glorious history of Shaaray Tefila, the gates of prayer. Here's to the future.